All right. Well, concerned parents and kids at underperforming schools across Michigan may not have to worry about their school shutting down. This week, Michigan Superintendent Brian Whiston said he's working with the state reform office and those 38 schools flagged for problems to come up with a partnership agreement. That agreement would be a plan to improve performance and accountability from the local districts. We also got some news out this week. Actually, it was reported in the Detroit News, Nolan, that the report from Governor Snyder's commission talking about education in the state is going to be coming out on Friday, and one of the items in the report is perhaps getting rid of the State Board of Education and having the superintendent appointed by the governor. Before we get into the governance status of that, which I guess was actually a large problem that we've talked about, let's talk about the fact that these schools might be off the chopping block. And I'm going to start with you now, Stephen. Is this a better response, do you believe, to what we're seeing in terms of school performance, or are you still skeptical?
It's a more measured response, right? So if you look at the whole idea of closing schools, we're the only state that talks about poor performing schools that way. It's just not the remedy that you come up with if you're trying to improve outcomes. It's a punitive measure that people like to take, sometimes against urban school districts, sometimes against teachers' unions, those kinds of things. But if you look at states that are performing better, Massachusetts, Maryland, Tennessee, Florida, they don't close schools. When they have low-performing schools, they have programs to try to deal with them. And so this is headed a little more in that direction. And I think politically, there was a lot of pressure on the governor and on the state superintendent not to close schools in Detroit, 6 months after you turned back over a system that you helped put into the condition that it's in. But long term, we need to have a different kind of conversation about school improvement. Closing schools, kills communities. We've seen that in Detroit over and over and over again, where you take the school out and the community withers around it. But it also doesn't improve school outcomes. There's no proof, there's no research anywhere in the country that suggests this is a winning strategy.
Is this a better pathway, do you think, Nolan? Or are you going to say, well, eventually something has to happen?
Well, I mean, you have to, at some point, defer to what the community wants, and they didn't want these school closings. But you also have to eventually deal with reality. You've got one of the high schools on the list, built for 1,000 kids, now has 200. It's not all just about the performance of the school. There is an overcapacity in the Detroit school system. We're keeping schools open that are vastly underpopulated. I think we've seen so many of these efforts, the EAA and whatever, to improve the schools, and I'm not sure this latest version by the SRO is going to have any more impact than that did.
Well, let's take a look going forward at this commission's report that's going to be coming out in full on Friday. But from what we're hearing, and I'll start with you, Nolan, initially, in terms of the setup of where the control of the schools of Michigan would come from, would be coming from the governor's office if they follow the recommendations of this commission.
I think that's one of the most significant reform ideas we've seen in Michigan education in a long time here. Ingrid got the copy of the report yesterday, had a column in the paper today. You mentioned all those other states and how they handle education, and they are doing much better than we are. But we are one of only 7 states that bifurcate governance, where the governor has a portion of education, whatever he wants to claim, and the state board has a portion, and they don't often work together, and their agendas aren't that same. And I've said for a while now that we can't move this state forward without a cohesive strategy and without everybody agreeing on the steps we need to take. That's hard when you have 2 political bodies that are at odds and both control the education establishment.
Do you think this is the solution?
I don't know that getting rid of the school board as an independent authority is the solution. I mean, I think some other states, they have sort of hybrid collaborations between the governor and the state school board. What we have doesn't work. I mean, I think we all agree on that. It's held us back. I don't know what the system should look like. There are a lot of different choices. I guess we'll wait to see exactly where we're.
And the report does, present. Doesn't say hard and fast, we want to get rid of.
Here's what we want to do.
It says we've got to change this governance, and we can't have an elected governor and elected school board both in charge. They might come up with a hybrid system. Right. It might be a board that reports to the governor.
I mean, what you want to guard against is the sort of political swing that you have with the governor's office, taking over school policy, right? So if you have a Democrat for 8 years doing one thing, you get a Republican coming in and undoing that and going the other direction, that's just as bad. And so
That's what we have now.
Well,
with the elected board.
but
There's got to be some accountability, and the governor should be right now. Both of them can go like this. Well, it's his fault. Well, it's their fault. You should have some accountability.
I think it's going to be interesting to see the response to the entire report. I'm looking forward to seeing that. We can talk about it a little bit next week and see if this is indeed the document or indeed the ideas that the state is going to need to finally to move forward in some kind of cohesive effort. And we'll talk more about that coming up next week.